As you will note, in each of your packets, there is a copy of the document that I put up on the website for you folks to download earlier. If you did not happen to bring that with you, you have a copy and you can just sort of follow around. And with that, we're going to be talking about the privacy standard and how it's sort of evolved since the last time we talked. So, with that, Jim.
Hello, everyone. I always look forward to these because there's always a great dinner, afterwards. And my decision to accept or not. Yes? You did this time.
It wasn't me, it was Donna.
And I did check the restaurant first, and I realized there was someplace I wanted to go. So I'm here giving the talk. That'd be a hell of a good restaurant. Well, Daniel's is pretty good. Daniel's is good. And I even got somebody to babysit. So I'm all set. I made sure I could do this. No, I really look forward to engaging you folks because it's so great having such a great mind, all these folks who really understand privacy, because as you know, not that many people do. And to be surrounded by people who actually care about this stuff is very refreshing for me. Okay, so what I want to cover this time around is I want to revisit some of the goals that I presented last time, which was 6 months ago, and then give you a little update on what we did with this Microsoft Privacy Standard. There's also some new tools and process I want to share with you. And I know that there's this thing called SDL that's been bantered about here. I want to explain what our plans are about integrating with that. And then, of course, the regular Q&A, which we never get to, because we end up diving down in some great topics. But I'm looking forward to that.
20 minutes without questions. Enjoy it.
Okay. So the goals last time, and kind of what we really are trying to do is, the first thing is I actually I spent a lot of time thinking about Longhorn. And for me, the primary thing is making sure that Longhorn meets whatever we consider the privacy bar to be. That's my job. I need to make sure that that product doesn't go out with some egregious privacy problem. And if we're lucky, it actually creates a user experience that resonates with people, and they actually like it. They feel like it's reasonable, and it's transparent, and they have control. These are basic privacy concepts, which we hope to see in Longhorn. The other thing that I've been asked to do was to integrate privacy with the SDL. And I actually moved from the Windows organization into the security team specifically to do this task. The person that I report to, Steve Lipner, who was there earlier, one of the people on his team is the architect of SDL. And so, but the fact that both of us share a common manager and it's a set of common review goals, there's a high degree of likelihood that we actually will talk to each other and try to actually trade notes and see if we can bolt these two things together. Because there is an opportunity for leverage and for efficiency if you can get these two processes to somehow take those common elements. Because the developers are being whacked up the side of the head with all sorts of requirements and mandates. There's all these different issues that they need to address, from manageability to accessibility. And we're just one more of those things that they see of one of like 30. And it's very hard for them to feel like they can take this, through all of these things. And if we can somehow reduce this tax, it's a huge win for them. Now, another reason to integrate privacy with SDL is that because there are so many, quote, mandates out there, to get a new mandate established is very hard. And I don't think politically that we could get privacy to show up as a mandate for products, even though I think it should be a mandate. We know that security is now considered a mandate, and that was hard fought. And so the concept would be, if we do integrate with security, then at least we can piggyback on the fact that they're a mandate. And the right things will happen in development. So that's kind of like the undercurrent here. I mean, there's the more idealistic view, which says, oh, privacy should be a mandate and security should be a mandate. But that's just not reality. There's a certain limit. People say enough is enough. That's too many things. I can't get my job done. I can't actually code. So we have to take that into account. Now, when trying to integrate privacy in the SDL, the thing that you have to think about doing is, I think there's 4 key pieces. There are the rules for privacy. There's a process that you want to use during development for privacy. There's the prescriptive guidance you're going to offer developers about how to do it right. And this is one of the key problems, because there's only a few of us around in privacy. In fact, I just recently had a new person join my team. His name is Nicholas Judge. He's sitting over there. He was the privacy person responsible for Passport. So he's had a trial by fire experience on privacy issues, and I'm ecstatic to have him on the team.
He had more hair back then.
But there aren't that many people that can infect privacy. So we need to sort of take our expertise and put it out there for people. We call ourselves subject matter experts at Microsoft, what's called a SME. And so I had this idea of doing a SME in a can. Taking your expertise up and trying to package it up and put it out there so developers can access it without you physically being there, because it's not enough. We're not scalable. And then finally, workflow. Once you have the rules and the process and the guidance, you still need to somehow track that it's all happening. And so workflow is a key component to rolling anything out. So our strategy would then dovetail all this with security and then deploy it out to people. So we're going to talk about these two things today. Now, on MPS, and you should all have a copy of it, about 5 months ago, not too long after we met last, we took a look at this, and we found that, while it was a great initial step, there was a lot of material in it, and it was pretty long. It was like 26 pages, and it got into a lot of process, and it wasn't clear that everybody agreed on that process. And so there wasn't a huge degree of consensus on parts of the section. Some sections were okay, other sections needed work. So we decided to revisit it and tighten things up. So we tightened up the definitions. We also went back and looked very carefully at the rules. And we removed everything relating to process, because we wanted to get down to fundamentals. Because if we got those right, then we could always add process back in. But what good is a process if your rules are wrong? So if you actually read, how many here had, that's not a fair question. You can have dessert tonight. One of the problems is, how do you figure out what the rules are? And what we did is we aggregated all the rules into a table. And I was doing that really as an exercise. I learned about kernel maps and all those other things. And there's all these great tools for optimizing stuff. And I said, well, just simply let's see if we covered the whole space. I was doing a gap analysis effectively on the rules. And I realized there were places we didn't even have a rule under certain circumstances. And I said, that's silly. Let's at least make this more regular and figure out and cover every case. And when we did cover every case, we learned that there were some other new cases we hadn't considered. And that got us to talking. For example, there was a whole bunch of flavors of anonymous data. And we actually treated them differently. There wasn't one rule about anonymous data. In fact, there's this whole concept of continuously monitoring people, what we call SQUIM in the company. We have something called software quality metrics. And it's a technology that is running all the time that developers use to sort of track what parts of the user interface you're using. And it also helps them build better products. And they assert it's all anonymous. But if you ask a bunch of people who would have this technology in their machine, that Microsoft is watching your every keystroke and it's looking over your shoulder, it kind of creeps you out. And so at the end of the day, it becomes a trust issue or a privacy issue for us, because we think it really deserves a consent experience. That before we turn on this automatic monitoring or turn it on by default, that it really should be up to the user. And we need a proposition. We need to be able to explain why a user should let us track them in order to make better products. And I think I've mentioned this in earlier meetings, that this particular proposition is very challenging, because the proposition runs something like this. Let us track your every movement so we can make better products and charge you more for it 6 months from now. What's in it for me? And so if we had simply flipped the proposition around to, let us monitor you and we'll give you half off on the product next time, that's a much better proposition. And we all know that there's a cost value to privacy. If people go to use their little cards at the grocery store, they know they get the extra 5% off for something that's been marked up 10% more anyway. But it's what I've always believed in is the horse trade. As long as there's a fair horse trade for this kind of thing, and the user's aware of it, and they can make that decision, then that's okay with me. They get a consent experience, et cetera. Anyway, continuous monitoring deserves its own sort of row, and it deserves special consideration in opt-in. Another case that we found was essential data collection. This is a new concept. We found cases where, let's just take MSN. MSN collects data, which is called QoS data, quality of service metrics. And they assert that they need this information to run the service, that they wouldn't provide it to people unless they knew how it was working, that they were reaching people and they were connecting and they were actually getting the data back. And so they actually collect this anonymous data. And that happens automatically. You can't opt out of it. So how does that work? Well, we said if it's essential to the product or service, then you need to do it in the terms of use. When they first accept the service, you need to tell them that this is going to happen, at least make it discoverable. So they understand that it's just part of how it works. Because when people pull out packet sniffers later, the privacy advocates, and they claim that we're liars because we didn't disclose anything or we're doing something weird with the data, we get exposed. So if we at least disclose it in a terms of use that happens right at the beginning, that's better than being silent about it. Yes. Essential collection is the concept that you wouldn't even offer your product or service unless you collected this data. It's intrinsic to your product or service. Another great example of this is actually Squim again. Well, in a final product, turning Squim on creeps people out. We turn Squim on during beta because beta, by definition, is the concept of getting feedback from external people. We need that information to debug the product. So by default, Squim is turned on in beta, and we think that's OK because it's essential to the beta process to have this information. As long as we disclose that, we think that's OK. Anyway, I think we've elevated our knowledge of how this works and these subtleties and all this nuance because this is really how it works at the end of the day. We actually do have these different experiences, and there isn't one size fits all just for anonymous. So this is what we did when we revved MPS. We started thinking more deeply about this stuff. We also thought about these other cases like hidden data. And what is hidden data? Hidden data would be like metadata associated with a file. The most common example that gets brought up is sort of Word files where your author information is left in that file. It's sort of not obvious to you that it's there. You then send it out thinking it's anonymous, like Tony Blair did, and then get hammered because they just simply look in there and they find where it came from. And you can't assert that it was from an anonymous author. And this really happened. And so Office has special switches for wiping out some of this hidden metadata that's personal. And so the issue comes down to how do you get people to understand the hidden data is there, and do we provide filters when you transfer information across a trust boundary? Before it happens, can you somehow filter the hidden data? I mean, this is kind of weird stuff, but it happens, and it really does affect people's privacy. And so we think we need to take some action here. We need to think about when we create hidden data, because it's not obvious to users, and then give them a fighting chance to take control over it.
We're within the 20-minute rule, so are we allowed to ask questions?
What? Go ahead.
Remove hidden data was a downloadable thing for Word, and then when I got Word 2003, I couldn't find it anymore.
It was buried 3 levels deep inside the privacy options.
Is it in 2003?
Yeah.
No. Never was part of 2003. It was an add-on launched after 2003 was released.
You're saying it's an SP to 2003?
Yep, that's right.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's
there.
I have to go to the website
Correct.
to get the
No.
hidden data again.
Yeah.
Because I thought I upgraded to the new Word, but I hadn't.
From a standards perspective, though, the issue is now actually promoting this concept of hidden data as a type, and think about what rules should be written for that. Another whole area that we didn't talk about earlier was children. And we all know the COPA rules are very critical, and your exposure is very high if you have an experience that's targeted to children. So we need to educate our developers about experiences they create that might fall into this, where they might be asking about age, and just because they know age, they've triggered this whole COPA set of rules because we know how old somebody is. Or they create something that is attractive to children. They don't realize that they have to follow the COPA rules. So we also clarified different flavors of consent. This was a big challenge because there's opt-in and there's opt-out, and we had this also a concept of explicit consent and implicit consent, and we tried to clarify what we really meant by that. And the implicit consent is most commonly used when you've got anonymous data that's being transferred, and you don't need to hit them over the head that this is going to happen, but you do need to give them a fighting chance that you are transferring data over a trust boundary, like through the internet. So you would use an implicit consent experience like get help online, or contact Office online for help. And you're going to the internet in order to get that. And as part of that transaction, you're going to have normal internet traffic, like IP address is going to be sent. Probably there's a cookie too. But you don't need to have this big disclosure. Do we have your permission to get help online? And it's going to do all this stuff. It's sort of implicit on just any embedded link that's simply going to link to a website to display data. Happens a lot. So we added those things in. And the result was, I think, a much better foundation to use for things like how would we bolt this into SDL. It offers a lot better coverage than we had in the first version. And there was much clearer consensus across the teams. There was specifically Windows Office, MSN, LCA, the corporate privacy group, or even our support group all got involved. And we all felt better about MPS. And I think if there was one real outcome of this is that we all got behind it. To be honest with you, when we shared it with you the first time, some of us were in the room kind of looking at each other saying, Do we really share that with them? We're not really done yet. We don't feel really good about this. And now we feel much better about it. Of course, we'd love to get your feedback on it and to see whether we hit the mark or whether you disagree with the rules or, and it's a living document, so it's going to have new material in it. For example, it does not currently cover CFAA issues of modification of software. So one of the things we do a lot in Windows is, not a lot, but quite often, is update the system, either through automatic update. Even when you first start Windows, it goes out and looks for new drivers because you can't even boot the system unless you have the latest information. It's really kind of a complex set of things. And so there's 3 or 4 places where we look for newer stuff. And if the newer stuff is found, then we're going to update the system with it. And you could trigger the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act rules around modification of a system without consent. In addition, there's this whole work, which we've talked about previously, around spyware and phishing, about best practices and for ad experiences and for if you're going to take over a home page, what kind of consent experience you should have for those things. MPS does not reflect those today, and we should put those in because they're all part of that trust experience we have with users. So moving on from MPS, I want to talk about the new privacy process. And a presentation from Mr. Friedberg wouldn't be complete without a color picture. So I have your handouts. If you could pass those around that way. You can pass those around this way.
It's always ultra large legal. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, no, I agree. Yeah. Public universities can't even afford
Yes. It's really a question of what my bosses are going to pay me to do. I would love to write one. It's really a question of priorities. Getting the entire company to do privacy right is really important to Microsoft right now.
So for the connection to that is partly based on feedback from the board. We will be making the standards public, available. I would see that...
Were you talking about the battlefield? Yeah, he was talking about the phishing battlefield. I know what he was interested in. And I agree with you. That would actually be...
But Peter's the person we have to...
Well, actually, it's Steve Lipner who's my boss. But
Steve is the one who we have...
You can beat him up the next time he talks. I think he's going to address you tomorrow.
It might be a good topic in Jason's
Okay, does everyone have a picture except me?
There's a whole bunch.
All right, so here's the deal. When you come up with a process, it's very easy to just do an ideal process and have just one flavor of it. And the problem at Microsoft is that one size does not fit all. I cannot take 15,000 developers and ask them to jump through flaming hoops. I have to take every single hoop or every single question. Every time I touch them, I need to make sure it's fully justified and that they're not doing any extra work because it just gets multiplied n times, and it's just a non-starter. They have all these other requirements I mentioned earlier. So I think the strategy, and I think it's a sound one, is to simply to make the cost proportional to risk. That whatever we do for a process, it should be proportional to the amount of privacy risk that's going to happen. So, if the person's taking sensitive data that's, health information or financial records, or they're targeting kids, you know what? They're going to be my best buddy. I'm going to have to sit down with them and make sure they get it right. They're going to sit down with their LCA group, and they're going to make sure they get every single one of those laws complied with, right? On the other hand, if they're just simply doing one of those embedded links to get help from Office, I really can't be bothered. There's so many other things that I need to worry about. If I just told them what the guidelines were, the chances are they might even get it right the first time. I might want to go back and audit them, but I don't need to sit down with them and explain all this. So the idea is cost proportional to risk. And so what I did is I looked at the behaviors that I saw that we typically think about, that MPS talks about, and I ordered them, in my opinion, by risk. And the risk levels, of course, at the highest would be kids, sensitive PII, and I mentioned the laws that they trip on the right. Transferring nonsensitive PI is probably next. Modifying the system is concerning. The continuous monitoring now shows up, having to do with people getting nervous and all weirded out. And quite frankly, it's a deployment blocker. There really aren't laws around continuous monitoring of anonymous information. But what is there is that enterprises won't allow it. They need to maintain the confidentiality of their materials, their IP. And they can't do that if they don't know what the system's doing. If the Microsoft system is sitting there with the light blinking and there's some kind of traffic going over the internet, where the hell is it going and what is Microsoft doing with it? We can't just phone home to Microsoft. So all the phone home scenarios are effectively deployment blockers in enterprises. We had $300 million worth of block deployments 2 years ago at XP. And when we added in XPSB2 25 group policy controls to turn off all the traffic, even though they were nonsensical, even though there were things like certificate revocation, we allowed the administrators to turn that stuff off. So they felt they had total control over their systems in their enterprises. That's what they need to feel comfortable about. Now, they can turn those things back on, and we recommend they do. But at least they're now empowered, and they feel like they can tell their employers that they've done the right thing. So what does this translate to? It translates to this new picture, and I would like to walk through it. It's not as bad as it looks, but it's actually kind of interesting. So I'm going to walk in front of this one. Hopefully you guys can see me over there. But across the top, you've got the standard software development lifecycle of design, implementation, verification, and some kind of release. If you start on the far left-hand side, the very first thing we recommend really early in design, just after you've developed your requirements and you've got that napkin with the design on it, this is when we want them to talk to us. They should do this initial assessment and try to figure out, are they in one of those risk categories? And when I said I had that table ordered by risk, I actually broke it into 3 tiers, P1, P2, P3, just because the number 3 is very nice. People like 3. I could have done 4, could have done 5. 3 is great. People get 3. So you're either P1, P2, P3. P1s are the highest risk, P2 are the medium risks, and P3s, there's no risk at all, really, from a privacy perspective. And so just by looking at this chart, you can see that the P3s sail through the process without any burden. They go directly to the Checkpoint Express. They get to say, I'm done. The P1s have the most number of steps to go through. And the colors are significant. The greens are things the team does all by themselves without me having to be in the room or any of our people like Nicholas. And then the yellows are optional, and they require us to be there. And the blues are required. So if you look at the blue circles, you'll notice that the most number of them are in the P1s, and that makes sense because they're the highest risk. And the one at the bottom here, P2, is there's only one place we really need to touch each other, which is to make sure we've disclosed their behavior. And so they start off with this initial assessment. They break themselves into P1, P2, 3. And the first thing we try to do is put the fear of God in them. Because what we don't want to see is people just saying, oh, let's collect this kind of data. Let's target kids. Oh, this will be fun. No, it's not fun. This is going to be months of review and legal risk and exposure. Just don't do this unless you have a really great business reason for doing it. And so we want to provide all this information at the beginning to give them that frame of reference of what the obligations are, and then techniques to reduce their risks. So what is their techniques? Well, their techniques would be things like minimizing the data they collect. You know, if they don't really need to collect the age, maybe they just need a year or birthday, not the date. Or if they're collecting zip code, don't collect zip plus 4, collect just zip. Or if you're collecting a phone number, get rid of the last 4 digits. I mean, you don't need it if you're doing demographics. So these are very simple things you can tell people to do that you know, lower the sensitivity, lower the risk, and get them maybe from a P1 to a P2. They're suddenly no longer
those
personal.
examples, P1 to P2?
I'd have to think about each one of those in context. But yes, they're potentially, you know, if you're going to aggregate, you will get down to P2. So that's just some of the examples. The other thing you can do is, well, I mentioned reduce the data you actually collect and also reduce its sensitivity. Those are 2 key techniques, and everyone knows about minimization. It's a common concept in privacy. So after they try to do this by themselves, if they're still a P1, then I think they should meet with us because it makes sense for us to at least give them other ideas that maybe weren't captured in the documentation. Maybe we came up with better techniques. Maybe we could see something that they're doing and come up with a better design. So we advocate or highly recommend meeting with us as a sanity check. This isn't a formal review. This is an hour meeting. They just kind of tell us their concept. We give them some feedback, and who knows, maybe we just save the company boatloads of money and risk by giving these people just enough to maybe rethink what they're doing.
Can you handle that many? Is
Yeah,
that too many?
I don't think it's that many.
How
It's
many
not,
SMEs are there? 2.
well, to be honest, you know, we have a whole privacy cabinet. We have maybe 12 people. But at the end of the day, for Windows, just a handful. For MSN, it's a handful. For, you know, Office, it's 1 or 2. So you just have to be careful about this. But I think it's prudent. I mean, if someone has, you know, targeting kids, I think they need to talk to us. And I think it's worth an hour of our time. I think that's what we get paid for.
But you know, it's important to put into context that the numbers of P1 type things are just really not, they're not the common way that we do business.
Well, that's a great segue, Peter. I actually wanted to test this because I did actually come from a university. And I wanted to validate it, so I actually went to the Windows privacy statement and I analyzed it. And I looked at everything that we wrote down. And I broke it down by behavior and risk to see the distribution, to understand how much of our components fell into each one of these classes, just to get a feel for it. And in the Windows privacy statement for XPSP2, out of the 25 things we decided to post, which are really feature-based or component-based, 2 were PII. Only 2 out of 25. And they were registration and Windows Messenger, because we had a PUID from the passport in there. The others were mostly anonymous transfers, but they also modified the system. They had a lot to do with automatically updating the system, and we felt compelled to tell people about that. There were about 6 or 7 of those. And then about 7 or 8 were anonymous transfers because we're pinging a web service. So at the end of the day, there aren't that many P1s. They're just, if you do it right.
Don't you list installing software? Is patching the same as installing software?
The tool that goes out and looks for new versions and updates it is what we would review. In our parlance, that's called automatic update or Windows Update. There's one component that does that.
That's not P1?
That is P1. That is a P1.
Has there been any action about an automatic update like that?
In terms of an action against us,
Yeah.
concerns?
Yeah.
We internally, vacillated all over the place on it because we wanted to turn it on by default for safety reasons, but we also felt in the EU we couldn't do that. So we ended up with a pure opt-in experience where nothing's pre-checked, but highly encouraged. But I also want to point something out here. When I look at feature teams in Windows, there are 500 feature teams. Of the 500 feature teams, we only chose to publish 25 of their behaviors. 25 feature teams met the criteria for being published in the statement. And of those, only a handful were PII. So my assertion is that we actually, at least in the Windows platform side, don't do this very often. And we try to very narrowly focus when we take someone's personal information and keep that in one place, like registration or signing up to a newsletter or something else when we know their email. So with some confidence, I feel like, OK, well, this might work because we're not going to have that many people up here. But let's talk about what the steps are. The next step is to build something that's compliant with MPS. And we know that all the P1s in general have the following elements. They more or less need prominent notice. They need explicit consent. There's enterprise control. And yes, data protection because it's mostly PII. And these are the things that these developers are going to have to address. For P2s, which have less risk, unlike these guys, they just need discoverable notice. And quite frankly, implicit consent works for most of these things. And enterprise control is still required. So you still need a group policy to be able to turn it off. But no data protection is necessary. And this just gives you a feel for the difference between a P1 and a P2. So assuming that we tell them how to do this, and we also have this concept of a cookbook, where we take the MPS, and it's a nice document, but it doesn't have that many examples in it. We started authoring a cookbook, which would include the scenario the person's trying to do, all the rules that you need to do for that scenario, the guidance for each one of those rules, and examples to show you how to actually fulfill it, both good examples and bad examples. Because we all know from teaching that it's also good to show people how not to do things. They learn a lot from that. So I'll share that with you in just a little bit. So the cookbook shows up here, and this is now they're building their design. Now, before you start implementation, this might take 6 months or so, or if you're doing a web page, maybe just a couple of days. Depends on what you're building. Before you invest in this next year of implementation, you really should hold a design review. And quite frankly, we didn't have these design reviews in the formal process previously. And you wonder, well, how is that possible? You're waiting till the end after it's built to kind of critique it. That's just kind of silly. I've always been a big fan of in-the-weeds assessments or early assessments, and this actually makes it formal. So holding a design review is a good thing. To make this efficient, we're going to have them do a detailed analysis. Now, you've heard of threat models for security. It's a similar concept. And we originally came out with a detailed analysis last year that, unfortunately, was not well thought out. And it was sort of a verbal threat model where a person would have to sort of, in writing, explain all of the ways data flowed in and out and how it talked to other components. And, it was a real tour de force with respect to really trying to get to the nitty-gritty detail of how things moved around. But at the end of the day, when we sat down with people in privacy reviews, and I've done hundreds, at least 100 or more, you end up asking the same 6 or 7 questions. It's really about what data are you collecting, and what's your use of it, and how much control does the user have? Do you have these group policies, et cetera? And you don't need as much of the information that we asked. Although it's interesting to get, and it's an interesting analysis, at the end of the day, it's not in the form that's the most useful. Maybe a picture would be better. So I actually looked at that detailed analysis, and in the limit, we were asking 69 separate questions to groups to fill out. And that is, you're not surprised when you get back detailed analysis that are not completed very well. I mean, the quality of the information we're getting back was so low that, we don't really think they're of any value anymore. And we went back and revisited this detailed analysis, and we looked at it very carefully, and we said, look, let's just kind of raise it up a notch and try to simplify it down. And we got it down for P1s to just 8 questions that we want people to answer. And we think this is now in the right order of magnitude for all the other work that they're doing. And we still get useful information. And again, it's just in preparation for the meeting anyway. But if they do a good job of writing this information up, then we might be able to do this by email and just simply say, oh, you're fine, or you really do need to come in. We need to learn more about this other thing. And we're not really wasting their time. So detailed analysis happens here. We also say flag in the threat model, data that as appropriate, like PII. That would be a good thing. You hold this design review, and of course, if it's sensitive data or kids, you're going to have the legal people in the room also. You're going to green light them for their implementation. They go and build what they said they're going to build, hopefully, and then they need to test it. And testing is really problematic, and I'm going to ask your help at the end of the talk about testing. But the idea is at a minimum, making sure that they actually built the user experience that they said they're going to build, that, in general, that if they said they're going to protect data from unauthorized access, that you try it and make sure people can't get to it. And then we also have this concept of code scanning, where we actually look at the entire code base and look for places where phone home scenarios are happening, where there's a suggestion that it could happen, and then go back and figure out if those have group policies around them. We actually found a handful of missing group policy controls in XPSP2 this way. Because the code base is so big, people just don't realize they're even doing it. For example, Notepad phones home. All right. That kind of surprised a lot of us.
Why?
Thank you. All right. It's exactly that thing. It's not intuitive. And it's because it was calling a function that, as part of its initialization, called another function that talked to the web. And so even though Notepad wasn't necessarily using and transferring this information, that light would blink, right? A packet sniffer would find something when you launched Notepad, and people are saying, why is Notepad phoning home? And that's what happens when you have a complex system. OK.
But can I just ask, the discovery of that, was that manual?
That was through a scanning process, but the scanning process was, I think, brute force. And in fact, Nicholas is working with the team that did the scanning to document it and then try to take it to the next level where we do it more elegantly. Because I think if the guy got hit by a car, we'd be finished. I think he has all the folklore for how that got done. And it takes like a week to do the scan. So it's not something you do every day. And it's something that you still get some value out of. OK. So moving down the path here. Now we want to actually release, and our philosophy has always been that if you do a public release, even if it's beta, you're going to have privacy risk because people see what you're doing, and the advocates can say, look what Microsoft is doing. They're taking all this data from me, and my God, can you believe what an egregious privacy thing they just did? So we know we're exposed at beta, so we want to have our reviews even at beta. And we also want to have a privacy disclosure at beta that at least covers most of the big risk items, just so we can preemptively prevent bad press and also do the right thing. So in order to make this final validation and sign-off efficient, we want them to update their detailed analysis. We also want them to write a draft privacy disclosure. Well, why is that? Because we were in the past just our small little team trying to create these disclosures from all these people. And it's just so hard. It's just so much material to go through. It's not scalable, as I said earlier. But we ended up doing it, and we did publish the XPSP2 privacy statement. But we all lost a little bit of our lives doing it. And if we can get them to write some portion of the privacy disclosure, even if it's not wordsmithed very well, it's going to save us some time. And I don't know, maybe we'll get 10% of the people doing a great job and 50% doing an OK job that we need to clean up a lot, and 20% we have to throw away because it's just terrible. But anything is better than just starting from scratch.
I thought you argued that there was hardly any of these.
That's true. But what happens is that features tend to roll up in other features. So of the 500 features, one of the things we don't know yet is how many were hierarchical. Like for a given disclosure of the 25 I mentioned, did that actually roll up 30 other features that are being tracked by the Windows build team?
I mean,
30 other ones use this one?
No, that they are subsets, subcomponents of that bigger component, and they all roll up. So I might be a feature that does one aspect, yet the user experience is a thing that does 5 different things. And so the privacy disclosure is around a scenario, not a particular component. And this is actually a big dilemma, because when you try to roll out processes like security and privacy together, if security is doing their analysis at a feature level, and we want to do it at a scenario level, then we actually have 2 different granularities going on simultaneously, and it's hard to understand how you bolt these things together seamlessly and get it right.
So maybe that's just, maybe you just asked the question. Did you say that the people writing the components have to write the scenario drafts? Or you said you don't know how to do that yet?
We want to allow people to roll up their need for disclosure to other larger components, because it's entirely possible that we're asking too fine grain at a too fine grain level. And the kind of disclosure we'd get would be so small and so meaningless that it isn't until it's rolling up into a bigger component that we understand its complete behavior.
I think I see what you're saying, but I'm kind of, as a computer designer, hung up in your flowcharts there.
Yes.
It sounds like that green box applies to a broader class than the entry.
That is correct. You're correct. And that this is, an end-to-one thing, all right? So or a one-to-end thing. There's basically only a small subset of the components actually. Well, first off, you're separating out components vertically.
Right.
We're hoping a lot of components live here in P3.
Yeah.
Right? Of the ones that live in P1, you might take 10 of them and group them together into one disclosure. That's not atypical. Like printing. They have like 10 print scenarios, 10 print things, and we'll probably have 1 paragraph on printing in the privacy, even though in the feature there's remote printing, there's this kind of printing, there's, et cetera. They download new drivers, and yet we probably wanted to say, when you print, these things can happen to you, and just aggregate those together, because it's easier for a user. It's just too noisy.
Can I just, so the chart almost needs a new arrow in there or something. I mean, I don't know what to have, because it sounds like it might be fewer privacy statements you need to draft because 10 roll into one, or it might be way more because one component turns out to have lots of scenarios and require privacy notices in lots of places. And it is sort of, I just sort of assumed that there was one, you sort of go all the way across, but now it turns out that you're multiplying and dividing at that step.
Yeah, it's an art at this point. It's not an exact science. This is basically when we go in a small group and close the door and we try to craft the privacy statement, we try to figure out which of the components we're actually going to promote in the statement. How many of them meet the bar of need for disclosure? And then how would we take all this technical garbage and drop it into a format that a user can actually get something out of? And I'm not even going to get to layered statements, okay? Because at the end of the day, even that level of information that we have is still too much. And we still need to have that single-page summary that still gives people some sense of what's going on so they don't have to read 25 pages. Because that's what the current privacy statement is. It's like 25 pages.
Can I ask a related
Yeah.
question? So this happens at a feature level, and then does a similar thing happen when you figure out how the features work? Because there's kind of the ecology of the system versus the little bugs.
Okay.
Again,
If you read the note right here, it says the design review and release validation steps depicted here should happen at a system level when possible over a logical grouping of features that support a scenario. Okay? And there are also feature level reviews that happen at that fine grain level, which happen anyway, because they do design reviews and implementation. But typically, what we want to do is add privacy to those. But then as privacy experts, we want to look at the system. All right? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's really 2 different
I
levels.
guess next time we come, we're having 2 of these pieces of paper.
Well, whatever it takes to get it to work right. I'm just here to reduce risk. Okay, so anyway, we end up pulling all this together, and we also then publish this privacy statement, and you're done. In the case of the P2s, these design reviews and final reviews, I think I won't call them optional, but there's 3 cases that I think are interesting when you would hold these things. The first case is that if the group is just unsure and they want confirmation they did it right, I would not turn them away. I would not say, I'm not going to talk to you because you're P2. I might say this, I've got a bunch of P1s I need to talk to first. I'll get to you after I'm done with them, and I'll triage them down. The other case would be if they have an exception. If they know they're going to do something different than the MPS, they need to come and talk to us. Because who knows, maybe MPS is too restrictive or just wrong. They may be right. Or that maybe they shouldn't have an exception, but they should meet with us. And the last case would be an audit, where we decide and ask them for a review, because we might We want to just verify these P2s are not really P1s. And we might know based on history that they used to be a P1. We don't understand why they're now a P2. So that's the privacy process as it's laid out.
Is it your experience that in that green box in the public release that they usually come up with less than there are, or that they come up with more than? Because that's the team doing that, not you, right?
Which green box? The one in public release?
Update P1 detailed analysis.
I just want their analysis to reflect what they built. There's a great likelihood that after their analysis they did at design that they actually make changes, because that's what happens when you develop code. You end up, changing your initial assumptions of things.
Okay, but you were saying this is an art. I assume that the product group probably doesn't have that art down as privacy folks do. So I assume that what they come up with there, when you're validating it and signing off, that they're either haven't included all of them, or they've included too many, or is the template detailed enough that doesn't happen?
So here's the reality. We had that old detailed analysis with the 69 questions. I think most of it is useless. I think most of it is not filled out very well. So in answering your question, I don't even think they were able to do that. We're lowering and we're raising up the questions. We're making them more relevant so that they can answer them. We haven't rolled this process out. We're just in beta of this new process. So I can't tell you how well they're going to do it.
Okay.
I'm hoping they're going to do it better than they did the old one, and that we're moving forward in getting better information to base these decisions of whether we're building the right thing or not.
What I was trying to get at was whether your gut feeling on this back from when you were doing a 69 was that they tend to overlook things, thinking that they're not privacy, not disclosure, whatever it is we're doing there, privacy disclosure things, or whether they do too many.
We'll find out. I actually don't know.
Okay.
I don't know yet. We'll have to see. Anything's better than what we've got now. I'm not getting any useful inputs
I'm not
to reviews.
disputing the process.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to understand.
Now, it'll be interesting next time you come how well this worked.
Okay.
Jeff?
Yes.
Is the difference between the 8 and 5 questions that there are just 3 questions that are not in the one for P2?
I'll show you them in a second. So let's talk about some new tools. In order to roll out this process, I need to be able to make sure people can do it. So, we refreshed a lot of our content. And now that we have this foundation in the privacy standard, we want to be able to do an initial assessment. So, you can give someone a little white paper explaining what initial assessment is. And you can also explain the kind of behaviors that make up a P1, P2, P3. And you can get them to self-select and grade. You could also then update the detailed analysis and just make it kind of simple, just this 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 questions depending on their behaviors. And you could say, if you're such and such a behavior, then answer this. If not, answer some other question. And you could do that. You could also do it for the P2s, and you see they're much shorter, just 1 page, because there's not much going on in anonymous. And then at the end, you could also get them to write a little draft privacy disclosure in a template, right? But at the end of the day, you end up with these 4 or 5 different documents. And I don't know about you, but I can't keep my desk straight anyway. And I can't imagine developers want to keep 4 or 5 documents straight either. So to simplify all this, we came up with this concept of the MPS Companion. And the MPS Companion basically is this really nice step-by-step guide that's going to take them through this entire picture from left to right, in the process picture, make sure they don't miss any steps. And at the same time, capture all that in one document. And also, more importantly, optimally ask them the questions that are relevant to them and guide them through the process optimally. Now, how do you do that? Well, it just so happens that there's a product we've got called InfoPath. And I used it a year ago for a similar project, and it didn't work very well. The new version was much, much better. I ended up, with our team taking this and using it, and I'm actually really pleased with the result, and I'd just like to show you what that looks like. So here is the InfoPath form that a person would fill out if they're going through the process, and it's going to live with them from end to end. So I don't know if you can see that from here, but it's basically titled the MPS Companion. And the first thing you're going to do is you're just basically going to tell us what product group you're in. Like Longhorn, you're going to tell us the name of your software, and you're going to tell us who do we come to when things are messed up. And then the second section is to do that initial assessment. And you'll notice that the form at this point is very short. There's nothing left of the form. It's just question 2, because we don't know what their rating is. We don't know what other questions to ask. We don't know where they're going to get channeled through that process. We want to make this really efficient. So you'll notice that here are the behaviors straight out of MPS, plus 1 or 2 extra ones, like installing new software, changing the browser or search page. And if they check any of these, they're going to get a rating. So I'll just start checking these. Right now, their rating's unknown. If I check the store PII box, for example, their rating suddenly became P1 down here. And so we don't want them to have to figure out the rating. We'll figure it out for them, and that's what computers are for. So it's actually an intelligent document. There's a lot of logic in these buttons. And I can also now say, you know, I might install software, I might continuously monitor, or maybe I'm none of the above. If I'm none of the above, I'm now a P3 at the bottom, and I have no privacy risk. Again, the whole form is going to optimize itself based on their behaviors. And so let's just say I'm over here. I'm really not sure whether PII is what PII is. I'm just really learning about this. I'm a developer. So you can click right on this. And right in the middle of the form, you're getting this prescriptive guidance.
Isn't it clever?
So that you can figure out what this stuff is. And so we give a nice high-level summary of PII and what it's all about. But you know what? At the end of the day, let's just say sensitive PII, we really want to go to the Bible. And so if you click on this thing, you get dropped right into the section in the MPS for sensitive PII. You have got all the context. You're trying to figure out your behavior. You now understand PII. You want to understand sensitive PII. You want to learn more. You get dropped right into the Bible. So that's the best we can do without being there in the room. And this is called InfoPath for those that want to know. And by the way, I set this up over a weekend. Now, granted, I did have Fred as a professor, so it did help.
So did I.
I'll get to that later, Fred.
OK, so let's just say we're a P1 here, and we're going to take PII, and let's just say we're going to transfer anonymous data also. The next thing I'm asked to do based on the chart is understand my obligations, lower my risk, and what do we mean by that? Well, again, just in the middle here, there's exactly the 2 sections that relate to those behaviors, storing or transferring PII. We talk about how to minimize and how to, the whole thing with the zip code and all that stuff that we just talked about, the use of GUIDs and avoiding it. Also, the general statement that if you're hesitant to tell the user up front what you plan to do with their data, then don't collect it. There's some really basic, privacy 101 rules that you just get the developer to think this way, you're going to have much better products at the end of it. And then here's a section on transferring anonymous data. And here we say, on the face of it, it seems odd that transferring anonymous information would carry any risk at all. But then we motivate this whole problem of administrators needing to take control of their systems. They now understand how we lose money, the whole phone issue, and the need to add group policy. So we try to be really demystifying all this so they kind of get it. By the time they're going to meet with us in a privacy review, they already know what we care about. We don't need to tell them that first set of stuff. So this is all in context. Then they go check their plans with a subject matter expert. Then they identify the compliant design. I mentioned the cookbook. And right here, the cookbook is available to help them with building compliant designs based on their behavior. So let me just clear that off. So you've got the cookbook. Here's a scenario transferring PI to Microsoft. Here's a set of rules. Here's a set of guidance for the rules. In this case, we have this kind of fuzzy thing called the compelling value proposition we want them to have before they do this. We need to explain what great compelling propositions look like and what lame propositions look like, because there are quite a few of them out there. And again, this is in draft form. Please, this is just very early, but it's a concept. It's scenario, rules, guidance, followed by examples. And so in context, you've got the examples that relate to this particular scenario. So the right way to do consent includes telling them what's going to happen, having a button for learn more, telling them a little bit about their privacy impact, and we can explain why it was right. We'll draw more arrows and circles and really make it clearer, color-coded a little better. And then you would expect just after this to say how to do it wrong. So here's the wrong way. Here's the same proposition, except in this case, even though we're taking this personal information, the only thing we mentioned about privacy is that we respect it. There's no crumbs there to explain how we're using it, or that you might get ads, or you might get communicated with. There's no real compelling reason for the person to click this. And we actually don't consider this a best practice. So moving on, we've got the other scenarios. Here's modifying system state. So there's the automatic update scenario as examples. There's details of how that might look. There's continuous monitoring, which is the SQUIM proposition, and this is what it looks like in MSN. Very friendly, explains what our customer experience improvement program is all about. I think it's got a best practice in the bottom that there's nothing even pre-checked. The user has to fully decide whether to join or not join the program.
You get extra points for pictures of children?
I think so.
Yeah.
I wonder if this constitutes being attractive to children.
Puppy dogs probably work too, right?
So I think you get the idea. We want to take examples from the various different product groups. And here's an example of what I would consider not a best practice that MSN currently does, but we don't want to mention names. In their detailed information, they actually list specifically what they're collecting. And on the face of it, that also sounds wonderful that you could actually see exactly what they're collecting in SQUIM. But we've learned the hard way that invariably you miss one. And then the advocates say you're a liar because you missed one. You obviously aren't being truthful. I hate to say it, but that's really what we're dealing with here, that at some point, you need a little wiggle room. So our best practice around this kind of stuff is, we collect system data such as A and B, and we leave out C just for a little bit of wiggle room. And I would soften this up just a little bit. I wouldn't make it so hard. OK, anyway, this is the cookbook, and you understand the concept. And it's one of these documents that can grow over time with better examples and better guidance on how to do this. So now it's time to perform that detailed analysis. And either they've done it previously and it's stored somewhere else, say that big 69-question document. I don't have the heart to ask them to do it again unless they think it's, if they think it's still valid. But if it's not valid, then what I expect them to do is to fill out these questions. And the questions we're getting are specific to the behaviors that we talked about. So we need to know about PII. We need to know the proposition. We need to notice and consent. We need to know how they're going to protect for enterprises. We need to know how users can control it. And finally, how to prevent unauthorized access. And I think in this particular case, there's 6 questions that came out of this. So for this set of behaviors, there are only 6 questions. And I think it's reasonable to ask a developer to just sit for a half hour and write this stuff, or 2 hours, or even a day.
These are the 6 that correspond to the 8 in the diagram?
Yeah.
It's because of what they checked.
It's really a max of 8. In fact, I think it's a max of 7. I mean, for example, if we go back up here and take away the PII case, you would expect the questions to change based on this. And now they're a P2, therefore their detailed analysis is much shorter. All they need to do is tell us about the anonymous data, consent, control for enterprises and users. There's no protection question because you don't need protected. And this is what I mean by streamlining the operations. Every question counts to a developer. If they have to scratch their head and spend 2 minutes thinking about your question, you've made a mistake.
Do you use these answers then to sort of help write that privacy statement?
No, we use these answers as input to the privacy review. In fact, we might be able to not even hold a face-to-face review if these answers are complete enough. And we tell them what we're looking for here. We're looking for certain kinds of things about their GUIDs and how long they live and what their lifespan is, how they're used, are they in the cookie, and their notice of consent. We want pictures of their screenshots. We just want to see what they're going to present to the user. In this case, they can either be implicit or explicit with respect to their consent experience because since it's anonymous, this is their only requirement. But if they had PII, the guidance of these questions change too. So it's all in context. And then step 5 was to actually hold your design review. And in this case, you'll notice that there's 3 options. It's only if you're asked to do so by a privacy SME, or you want confirmation your design's compliant, or you know you're not compliant and you seek an exception. If we had changed this, obviously, to the P1 case where you're taking PII, you're not going to have that kind of latitude. Step 5 is going to be a must. It's going to say, you must hold a design review with your SME. And that's exactly what we're talking about. Take all the if-then-else's out of the picture and trigger totally on the behaviors that they claim they have. And this means also that I could add behaviors over time and also make the guidance specific to different product groups. MSN might have slightly different guidance or different SMEs they want people to connect with. Then after they've built their design, we want to fill out that draft privacy disclosure. And either they're rolling it up because they're hierarchical and they're going to tell us that the disclosure is really buried in another form and they need to tell us the path of the form, or they're going to tell us right here and now what types of things they're going to do. And we use the template we use for the Windows privacy statement, which is, what's your software do? What user information is collected, stored, or transmitted? how is it used, and what choices of control does the user have? It's pretty high level, pretty simple, but we need it in customer-ready language. This is not nerd speak.
Question on that.
Yeah.
Do they have access to a library of previously used Microsoft language? Because one of the easiest way to write these things is to find a paragraph that's already written.
Correct. So the guidance right underneath has the actual examples, say, from automatic update. So this is what we want. We want lines like this. What information is collected, stored, transmitted. Automatic update collects general system information from the user's computer with each visit, so they receive the updates that work best for their computer. The information may also include a GUID. The GUID does not contain information that can be used to identify them. So that's the type of information we need.
That's one example.
That's one example.
And one question is, does it make sense to have an archive of their...
Sure does.
And so you've got that link somewhere so they can look to more examples?
Not yet.
Okay.
Give me a minute. It's an InfoPath form.
Okay.
Then they validate it with a SME and they get the final sign-off. So what we're hoping here is that we're introducing a new process, but we're hoping that it's going to be perceived as a benefit because it's streamlined, it's less work than they were doing before, all their data is collected in one place. If they later change their design, they can recode themselves as a P1, P2, P3, or whatever, and list their behavior and answer new questions based on that behavior. And this actually works like a Word document, which I like a lot. So for example, everything here floats around. You can print it, you can save it, you can mail it. It's not a web situation where you move away from the page and you lose all your state. I hate that. I never figure out back versus next versus save. The semantics are also weird. This is just very straightforward. And for example, if I try to close this with an X, it warns me and it says, do you want to save this? So I really am not going to lose my information. It even does incremental saves automatically. So it's constantly doing the save in the background, in case it crashes, just like Word. So it has all the right properties for me as a user versus some proprietary web thing that I'm still always confused about. So anyway, I think this is going to move us along, and I'm hoping that our developers enjoy it. We are currently rolling out a beta program of this right now. We have 5 teams using it. Their early feedback is, thank God you got rid of the old detailed analysis, stay the course, 1,000 points of light, that kind of stuff. So
in the fullness of time, how many of these forms will you have received, say, 2 years from now?
Well, for Longhorn Beta 1, we should have 500. Because there's 500 teams.
Because there's lots of them of P3s.
That's right. And to the extent that they're P3s, they may not have to fill this out, although I'd prefer them to fill them out and list that they have deliberately determined their P3. And then the only way I can track that is if they actually fill out at least the initial assessment saying none of the above. But hopefully that's pretty quick. That's just sections 1 and 2. It's one question. It's who are you, and a bunch of check boxes of which they say I don't do any of this. So at least I have a record that they've done it.
Is there something in the code release thing where they have to have a checkbox from you to release the code?
So we'll get to that in a minute. It's the exit criteria in the basics program. Okay. So let me talk a little bit about, now that you've seen the new tools, integration timing. So SDL, I don't know how much they've told you about SDL, but the secure development lifecycle can be revved every 6 months. And the window for this revs was March, the beginning of March. And so while we were working up to this point, we were actually thinking maybe we can integrate some of the privacy into SDL. And as we came closer and closer to that date, it was obvious we needed to first work on our fundamentals. We needed to get the Bible right. We needed the rules. We needed the process. We needed the guidance. And we needed the workflow. And we just got done with those 4 in isolation from security, just to make sure from a privacy perspective we didn't screw it up. And we're just at this edge of this March deadline. It just didn't pay to cram this into SDL. And we had a resounding feedback from all the people that cared, like Office. They said, please, please, don't do what people typically do, which is to rush and jam this thing in. Just wait for the next train and do it right. Just make sure this is really well integrated, because the real proof is whether developers have less work at the end of the day to do, that it's more easy for them, or they have more concepts that they're working at the same time. If they're doing security and privacy at the same time, there are certainly areas where those overlap. Could you leverage that? And I still think that's hard, but I think it's worth trying to do. And we don't want to cram anything down people's throat that makes life worse. And we didn't really have confidence that we could hit March. So we're missing the March deadline. We're going to deploy first with the Longhorn team. We are rolling this out, Nicholas and I, to the Longhorn basics process. And we're just going to wait for the next SDL train, which will happen in September, October timeframe. And that's where we're going to be dovetailing things in and rolling out an integrated process. We also need to refresh training and tools. It's a big amount of work. Even 6 months is aggressive. But something this fundamental that affects so many people, I think is worth trying to do right. So let me talk a little bit about exit criteria in Longhorn. So the Longhorn Basics process has a framework that people need to follow. Part of that process is the exit criteria to which you're allowed to leave Longhorn. I made the mistake when I first thought about exit criteria that it's what you wanted the code to be like. I wanted that all the code that was checked in was MPS compliant. I'd love to set an exit criteria that said that. 100% of the code is MPS compliant. Well, first off, who's going to prove that it's MPS compliant? How could you verify that was true? Exit criteria effectively is a gauntlet. It effectively is the stop ship for the release. If you can't prove your exit criteria, it cannot be an exit criteria. That's the rule. So at the end of the day, it's not this set of aspirations of what I want. It's really based on my existing resources, or our existing resources, and the weapons we have to use, if you think of the gauntlet metaphor. And the only weapons we have are those that are fully measurable methods, things that we could actually point to and say it happened or it didn't happen. So the methods I have at my disposal today are that they actually completed that initial assessment and have an impact rating, that they did one of those detailed analyses, either the long one or the short one, that they actually submitted a draft privacy disclosure, even though it might be unreadable, that as a privacy team, we actually looked over the user experience and we tried it. And it made sense to us. I could say that I actually looked at their code and checked that they did all the right security things with respect to preventing unauthorized access. I looked at ACLs. I looked at the way they handled the data. I don't have the staff for that. There's no way, as a measurable method, I could, with the people I have, do that action. I could also test for the missing controls. I could actually run a code scan, even though it takes a week. We've done it. And then check to see whether the controls that were missing were added back to the product. Maybe 50% of them were added back to the product, or 70%. I could set a limit. I could set a percentage. I could also say whether or not people that signed off on disclosure, that as a privacy cabinet, we authored some privacy disclosure, and we pushed it back to the teams, and they asked them, did we get it right? Did we properly capture your component? They could say, yes, you did. I could actually know whether they said that. So that's kind of what I'm stuck with, and I want to show you what our exit criteria actually is for Longhorn. And to facilitate that, we also split things into two risk classes. That P1 is still kind of thick. And there's really two strata. One strata is things like the kids, the high-risk stuff, and the sensitive data collection, and then sort of everything else. And we call those E1, E0 and E1. E stands for engagement level in Longhorn speak. E0s are things that are your best buddies, people who need special hand-holding. E1s is everybody else. So a P1 E0 is someone who's got a high privacy risk that you're going to need to really sit down with a lot. So if you see that combination, that's what I mean. So the exit criteria is that all the feature groups have at least done their impact rating. They at least know whether they're a P1, P2, P3. And then I would like to believe that 100% of those very high-risk groups, the P1 E0s, have completed their analysis and submitted some kind of draft. Furthermore, I believe that same group of people, we need to sit down with them and look at their user experience. UX stands for user experience. And I need to verify it's compliant with MPS. Did they do the opt-ins when we said? Did they provide appropriate crumbs for the user to figure out the privacy risk? Were there links to the privacy statement? All that kind of stuff. And this has to be there. Now, I can make this kind of statement because I don't expect there to be that many E0s. There's only Nicholas and I to make this happen. So we're talking about half a dozen, maybe a dozen at most. Otherwise, you'll never ship the product. Now, what about those other P1s? Well, there's 90% of the P1 E1s. The best I could do is just make sure they completed the analysis and they submitted a draft, but I don't have time to look at their stuff. I can't go in and actually review it. And for P2s, I can ask them to do it as well. Now, notice that these are scaled 100, 90, 80. And the reason is that M9 is just before the beta release. And so this is very similar to the beta exit criteria. And the question that I'm posed with is, will I stop ship the product if I'm missing one of those group policy controls for phone home? I don't think so. I mean, if there were 30 that were needed and 29 were done, would I stop ship Longhorn from going out there if they left that one group policy control? I don't think so. 2? No, let's let it go. 10? Maybe. So you can't be 100%. You really have to be realistic about the risk that you take by shipping the product in its form against what your aspirations are against the privacy level. So putting that in context, you now understand the difficult position I'm in. I cannot assert or have aspirational exit criteria that really gets us where we want to be. I can only measure what we can.
Can I ask a question? I'm a little bit concerned about this realistic aspect. That
hate to be realistic.
Well, you're basically deciding what to do on the basis of the resources you have rather than the needs.
And that's exactly correct.
It's still early enough that conceivably you could make a case you need an extra person or two. Not everyone is going to...
Thank you for the segue. Improving compliance.
Yeah.
So you could ask for more people. What would that buy you? Okay, well that would buy me scaling up any of the manual tasks. So instead of looking over 6 components, I get to do 8 or 10. Yeah. There's 500. So I can't really get to all of them. I know I can't. I could still break them into these risk levels and try to hit all the P1 E0s and maybe some of the E1s, and I cherry pick and triage, and we're still left over with some that fall off the bottom. I think we also need to look at better tools, because at least with tools we get scalability. All right? And the company's willing to actually invest in these tools. I have some tools groups that are even willing to write some stuff. Visual Studio can make changes. We can make improvements. And this is my ask to you. So now it's time to stop typing at your computers. Time to help me out. And what I'm thinking about is, right now what I do for tools is I have a code scan that I do, and I need to kind of tell you how it's done, but I'm not going to do that here. And the idea is, could we improve that? The next is, we had thought about packet sniffing just to verify that we didn't have leakage of PII. Maybe you could spike the system with PII at some point and see if it comes out the other end, kind of like a stain that you put in, and you watch it come out the bottom.
Can you give an example of what you get on a code scan?
I don't know. I haven't actually done it.
On home, right?
What happens is you get lists of things that use the internet protocols. I think it's basically traffic information that you've called that the code stack shows that you've called certain functions, and therefore you can assume that some communication's happening. I don't know if you could tell what was being sent, but you are calling functions that would communicate with the internet.
Static analysis is a wonderful thing, right?
What?
Static analysis is a wonderful thing. You could figure out a lot.
Yeah. But this last bullet is what I want help with specifically, which is data tagging. So, we could actually change the way developers code their code. We could actually, assuming we had a taxonomy around privacy and we understood what tags we want to apply to the code, what's sensitive, what isn't, how many classes of sensitive do we want. There's a data tagging initiative right now for Longhorn, but it's not applying to privacy. We could piggyback on that and add tags and at least get the developers to start doing it. And there's something called a quality gate. It's a gate that you cannot check code into the source code tree unless you've done these things. So one of the things we can add as a quality gate, assuming we can figure out how to do this, is to data tag for privacy. Now that we have this data in the system, we need the back-end tools to figure out what it means. So I don't know if it's static, dynamic, whatever. We need to figure out how we take this data and meaningfully determine something out of it. So I can get 15,000 developers to start instrumenting their code, and assuming they do it right, which they may not do, but at least we'll get there eventually. Could we run automated tools to verify that the MPS rules were followed? How much of that can we do? I know that I can't do the subjective tests. I know I can't say, does this consent experience feel right? Did you say enough? They'll never figure that out. The tools won't figure that out. It's a human being, and it's in context to culture. But I can tell whether or not certain data was protected as it flowed through the system. I could tell where it was going. I could, say, oh, this got to this other component that goes to a third party and has a plugin interface that God knows what happens. And that would be really useful. But I'm hoping that you guys somewhere in all the research that you do have knowledge or access to people that really have already thought about this deeply and somehow could bring to the table something that could kickstart this so we don't start from scratch. It's assuming we can leverage it. But that's my ask to you.
So you'd love to talk about it a little bit. There's all this historical work on adding security classes to data, secret, top secret, integrity classes, and keeping track of it. Does that not work here?
It might work. I'll be honest with you. I've been so busy on this bread and butter stuff, I have not looked at that. And if you've got pointers to stuff that you think is actually viable, that we could actually incorporate, I would be more than interested in hearing about it.
I'm just following on the last year I had a student use that kind of thing to do static checks of information flow using snippets of P3P policies, which is not quite the same as you're doing, but it was really, really small. I don't know if you would scale out to this.
I think code scanning and packet sniffing are the hard way to find these things. Most of the, now I haven't studied this in depth. I think I might, because it sounds awfully interesting. Testing is what I do. So most phone home capabilities are easiest to implement by calling operating system APIs. Those APIs then go out and form packets and do all that stuff, right? So it's the APIs that are far fewer in number to check than packets and code, right? I mean, I don't think most people who write spyware and do any type of phone home, legitimate or illegitimate, would grow their own inside their binary. They would use a resource that would be a lot easier to code. You should be scanning API
especially
calls.
for Microsoft code, right? They're not going to.
Yeah.
And it's kind of.
Can you give me an example, dude?
But whatever you call it, interceding on APIs is a pretty well. OS APIs is a well trodden, technique.
Give me an example of that notepad one, and I'll see if I can use a tool to find it. I'll do this in my spare time, so I can't promise to do it like now. But if I had an example,
so obviously we don't want to do design here in the room, although it's so much fun. But
I had a different take on all this.
Yes.
I thought the most important thing that happened was getting people to put their name if they were responsible
on the privacy. Well, I remember the story when James Hamilton came to this group and said how somebody claimed that they had passed security practice, and in fact what had happened is they just checked the box and they hadn't, and so James had to explain to 500 SQL Server developers how Harry and Jack skipped the process and we're not going to delay the code process, and he apologized, but that was what they were going to do. And I had the feeling that Harry and Jack and then every other developer who saw James's talk got religion that day about the importance of following good practices. So I admire your feeling of responsibility that you personally have to make sure that there's no privacy problems in anything Microsoft ships. But maybe sociologically, what's really going to happen is people are going to claim they did these things, and then bad things are going to happen, and then people are going to know, well, how did that happen? And these guys are going to have their names associated with that, and if they followed your practices and they got in trouble, then there's something wrong with them. But if they skipped them.
So here's my challenge. My challenge is, as a computer scientist by trade, I know that we have a software system in front of us, and I'm being challenged by the test organization and by those in release to say, help us understand how we can validate the right things happen. It isn't, I agree with you, you still have to do the front end to encourage people to do it, and that needs to be part of their DNA. I'd like to, as I said earlier, be taught in school and all that good stuff, but we still do testing. And the question is, what are the tests for privacy? What should they do? And I have a really hard time telling them what to do, because so much of what I do is user experience level.
I mean, tell the testers what to do.
Yeah, tell the testers what to do.
Plenty of things to tell the developers what to do.
Yeah, I don't have a problem telling the developers what their practices should be and to encourage them and to make them feel guilty and whatever it takes to make them feel like they should do it. Make more money for them.
Catching them when they didn't.
Yeah, even so. I mean, scapegoats, scarlet letters aside, there's still this, I've got this big test organization. They've got all these other people like performance. You take the performance basic. They say, we're going to go 15%, 85% of this speed, we're going to hit this. That's our criteria for exit. They hand it over to the test team. They go measure the code. They run a certain speed. They say, cool, we met the bar, we're done. For privacy, I hate to think that I'm stuck.
What's the security version of that? So what's the security version of testing where they hit 85%?
I don't know. I'm not sure exactly how they test either. But I'm being encouraged strongly to say, we're this company with all these resources, especially around development and test and these tools. Isn't there something we can do to automate or think about how to improve the level of confidence we've done it right? what is that? What is that? Now, I can do testing of the user experience. I can even sit down and ask them to show me their architecture, and I can do a design-level analysis. But I don't want to look at the code. There's 50 million lines of code, whatever it is. I can't do it. And we need to have automated tools run through this thing to do the validation. Or make sure it was right at the first. I don't care how it happens, but I need a way to increase the confidence that it's right. And I'm being asked to do that, and I'm being told, you're failing if you can't figure out a way to automate this. Now, if you guys come back and say there's no technical way to automate this, then at least I can take that back to them and say, I've got the smartest people around here telling me it can't be done.
Actually, that's not true. One of the things you could do is what we try to do in penetration analysis. What we did find, we find a bunch of properties that would really lead to penetrations. And then we can formalize those properties and interpret them to C, in C, and wrote tools to detect those properties in C. And you apparently are basically following the same pattern. You identify some very clear problems of privacy. Now you interpret those in code and write the tools to detect them.
Correct.
And that's not the hard part. The hard part is to convince people that those are close to all the privacy problems that we would have. It's sort of the completeness part of it that's difficult. It's not writing tools to detect 5 instances, 5 different instances. The question is, how do you actually gain the assurance, in some sense, or the confidence, or the warm, fuzzy feeling that you got them all?
Yes, that's also.
But that's all you can do. I mean, in terms of automation, I don't think you can do more. And that may be enough.
So on the tagging question, I think P3P could actually help a lot here because part of P3P was to come up with essentially a schema for data as well as for how data is used. And I think you could use the general schema as well as come up with a set of Microsoft data elements that, there's probably a common set of data elements that quite a few applications are collecting or draw from, and so P3P allows for a company-specific data schema to be created, and I think that on top of P3P actually would be very useful for what you're trying to do.
We can certainly look at that, as a starting point for schema.
Also, another thing you may want to do, you might want to come up with some rules for data aggregation that might, in fact, cause privacy problems. And again, write the tools to figure out what code aggregates data.
Okay. We'll take a couple more, then I want to have some closing comments.
I don't know if I can say this. Have you looked at the Tivoli Privacy Manager?
Which one?
Tivoli Privacy Manager.
The IBM?
Yeah.
EPAL and all that?
It uses EPAL, yeah.
Yeah.
They do some of these things.
They do some of it. It's really not at the level that we're talking about. It was more a work. If I remember correctly, I thought it was workflow through an enterprise. Versus in the code itself.
They do some tagging.
Yeah, no, but you're right. You could look at the schema at least and see. I remember actually looking at the schema and thinking it was, it had a lot of role-based information in it, which was a little different.
They haven't fleshed it out in the level detail that you want.
Exactly.
My understanding is they've kind of stalled on it.
Yes.
You never talked about the other end of this, and the other end might give you more leverage because it's more concentrated. But if you're collecting personal identifying information, you're collecting it somewhere. There's got to be a server that Microsoft's running that's collecting the information. If I wanted to find all the places that we were getting that stuff from in our applications, I would start at that server and identify all of the instances of those servers in the company and then figure out who's all sending information to them.
Work backwards.
Yeah.
That's certainly a possibility, too. All right, so one more.
Peter and I both have, but I know I can go first.
Okay, we'll take those two, then I would like to.
Well, I'll just say it to Larry. Go ahead.
I just wanted to understand, it looks like, right, if you think about implementing policy privacy, so you have like the policy, and this was the procedure, and you're basically saying that you can't actually go through and look and see what everybody's done in practice, and so what you need to do is develop some audit tools. Is that right?
I think if you just think about testing, the test phase of a regular development cycle, what do you do then?
Yeah.
What do you do during testing?
And so I don't, to the extent
it's a validation. It could be I call it an audit.
And also to the extent that you have all these, what were the prior incidents and what are the properties, like the common properties of those incidents? Could you develop testing tools that would test for prior threats and therefore, I mean, it's clearly not the whole thing, but it's at least one component.
Yeah. So you just realize, I don't know how many people at Microsoft call themselves testers. There's some number of people that raise their hand and call themselves testers. I would get huge leverage by leveraging the test organization, thousands of people, if I could figure out what they should be looking for.
Well, I mean,
I could leverage the tools group.
They can't operate like a red team and like, I mean.
I'm just saying right now, the only thing I really look at is the only thing I can practically look at is user experience and then look at architecture, because I can't really look at the code. And I'm not leveraging the test team in any meaningful way.
So that's the real, I mean, that's another version of the question, is rather than can testing uncover all privacy problems, it's here are these 3,000 people that we could do something with if we could figure out something to do that could help on the privacy problem.
I'm looking at 2 people, 3,000 people.
Yeah. So
2 people.
So what could we do?
And so I just feel like there's got to be something we could do better. And I'm open to those suggestions you have. I'm probably, like I said, I'm going to the dinner, so maybe you'll think about something even between now and then. And of course, when you go back to wherever you go, maybe you'll think of something clever and let me know about it. Did you want to say
Were
that?
you referring to the SAL work, the annotations?
Yeah.
Was that what the work you were referring to?
Yes.
And so it seems to me the difficulty here is coming up with similar kinds of classifications of data, like sensitive and so on.
Although we could leverage some PCP
Right, and
work.
so
I mean,
then the actual data flow analysis is, there are known algorithms and tools actually that do that. So that seems to be what's really holding you up. That's one comment. The other was, I thought that there was some early work done about a year or 2 ago by some people at Microsoft Research, Rob DeLine and Manuel Feinreich on Fugue, that allowed you to it was a quick and dirty sort of demo.
I saw that too. Fugue was interesting to me, and that's kind of where I wanted to head, because they were built it into the compiler, and it was really intrinsic to data typing within programming languages.
Right.
And I thought that was a nicer, elegant way to handle it. And I will follow up.
But what's the but?
No buts. I'm just putting out the call.
Yeah. So you asked us, the research community, what do we know about? Well, actually, that's one thing I do know.
That's great, and I will go back and circle back with the people. On my slides, I don't know if I had it here. My plan of record is to go back to research and Microsoft Research and tap them with the same question.
Although I actually think that project has sort of wound down.
Oh, I'm sure it was a prototype, and unless somebody picked it up and said, let's embed it into Visual Studio, it's not going to go anywhere. But if I could somehow say, that's my answer, let's do that. So let me wrap up. I do want to say that having this new Microsoft privacy standard is really very satisfying to have, because we do have all these different groups actually pointing at it saying, we're going to follow these rules. And we didn't really have that before at Microsoft. So this is a huge accomplishment for the company. Furthermore, I think officially creating some kind of prototypical privacy process helps a lot. Because a group might say, oh, I'm actually over here. And you say, well, look at what you skipped. You still have to figure out this kind of stuff, and it gives people some guidance of what to do. I'm intrigued and encouraged by the concept of the companion, which is this one-stop shopping, which gives people a lot of context around privacy. Although I know in my heart this will have to morph into the SDL anyway. So this is just an intermediate stopping place, and we will see this change probably by the next time you come here. But in the short term, I get to use it for the Longhorn, and I get to improve the ability of the Longhorn people to achieve privacy compliance. And hopefully we've raised the bar another notch. So with that, I will conclude and say thank you very much.